Hi everybody, this is Dr. Chaffee. Just wanted to do a video today on ancestral diets and the evidence for us being carnivores historically, and looking at the various tribes and peoples that are still living today or in recent times that live and what they eat and how they survive and so forth. So there's quite a lot of evidence showing that humans evolved as carnivores, and more than that we evolved because our ancestors went carnivore, and there was the ice ages that started about 2.5–3 million years ago, and this obviously killed a lot of plants, killed a lot of animals that ate the plants. And so our ancestors were close to carnivore, but maybe not quite, and the ones that survived were the ones that were able to live as carnivores in the ice times because there were no plants available, and so they had to be able to hunt and eat these large mammals like mammoths and so forth. So if you look at the fossil record, this is what we see. We look at studies such as the stable isotope study, and they've done stable isotope studies for all sorts of different things at all sorts of different times, and we find that humans and our ancestors had very high carnivore ratings, so they are able to see exactly how removed you are from eating plants. And the more removed you are means the more you may eat plants, so you're here. You may eat animals that eat plants, so you're here. You may eat animals that eat plants, you're here, and it goes up from there up the food chain. Okay, so our ancestors had like the highest carnivore rating. We had a higher carnivore rating than other carnivores alive at the same time, such as wolves, foxes, lions, hyenas, and so forth, alive at the same time in the same area. Okay, so we were eating these lions and hyenas and foxes and so forth, as well as the herbivores and so forth that ate plants. Okay, so we're top of the food chain, apex predators. These are terms that get bandied around, and then we all of a sudden think that salad is good for you. Apex predators don't graze. Name one example in the wild where apex predators predominantly eat plant-based material, or any plant-based material. Okay, maybe bears, they eat some berries and things like that, but that's basically it. Dolphins don't, certainly sharks don't, whales don't, all these sorts of things. So there's an Israeli study that looked at all sorts of different studies and all sorts of different points of information, and concluded that humans were hypercarnivores for 2 to 2.5 million years. This aligns with those ice ages. Okay, hypercarnivore means they just ate meat and so forth. I think the term hypercarnivore gets used loosely now. That means you just eat like 70% of your calories are from meat. This means that you did not eat plants, according to this study. Okay, so the fossil record is very interesting as well. Our skeleton has changed since the agricultural revolution. Our brains are 11% smaller than they were prior to the agricultural revolution for adult males on average. Okay, our teeth are different. You don't see cavities or crooked teeth or misshapen jaws or small jaws in the fossil record pre-agricultural revolution. Okay, so archaeologists can actually tell if a skeleton is pre or post agricultural revolution based on its teeth and its jaw, because they'll have misformed teeth. They'll be really crooked. They might have a lot of dental problems and so forth, rotten teeth and cavities, and their jaws won't be as big. So these people were all getting their wisdom teeth, and people 100 years ago were generally all getting their wisdom teeth. Now, like, almost no one gets their wisdom teeth, and all their teeth are crooked and so forth. And this is a nutritional deficit. There are a lot of studies and articles in various dentistry journals and so forth that talk about this. Generally, it's vitamin K2, which doesn't exist in plants, and you have that deficiency. This works with calcium and vitamin D3 and so forth, and K1 as well, and these all help form proper teeth and jaws. So crooked teeth are not genetic. Crooked teeth are malnutrition. Okay, so if you don't want to spend money on the orthodontist, give your kid a steak. Okay, it's going to be cheaper in the long run for that and a lot of other reasons as well. Okay, and I look at native populations. Just starting with the Native Americans in North America. You have like the Plains Indians who just ate buffalo and so forth. They live to be great age. There's a lot of studies and things like that, and different people like Dr. Salisbury, Dr. J.H. Salisbury, for whom the Salisbury steak was named after. he studied these guys. He studied all these different populations and looked at people and what they ate and how they lived and how healthy they were and how long they lived. And and he was talking about, back in the 1800s, how these guys were living 110, 115, 120 years old. And people sort of scoff at that. And, oh, that's just them saying that. However, we know as geneticists for 20 years now that genetically our average lifespan is 120 years. So meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and don't mess up, you should make it to 120 years without doing anything special. Okay, so why are we dying in our 60s and 70s? Why do we call that normal? And someone says like, they 78 years old, they died. Like, oh well, they had a good life. That's literally middle age. That's 78 would be late middle age. Okay, but they've got 40 years ahead of them on average if you look at our genetics. Okay, but we're not making it anywhere near that. Okay, it's remarkable when someone makes it to 100 or over 100. Okay, that should be the norm. All right, and it was the norm for them, living as Stone Age nomads. Not in a nursing home, turning to dust for 40 years, but with a pack on their back, following the buffalo herds day in and day out. These guys were very healthy, very hale and hardy. And you had to be to live out in the wild like that. Something I learned when I was about 7 was that when eating a Western diet, Native Americans were 4 times as likely to get obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and so forth. Okay, and that took me aback a bit. And I remember thinking as a kid, well, doesn't that mean the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the food and we get the disease, we just get it at a lower rate. What is a non-Western diet? What are they supposed to be eating? What were they eating before a Western diet? What do they eat that we're not, and vice versa? Okay, well, they don't tell you that at the time, but the answer is they're full high-fat carnivores. They would, scare a buffalo herd off a cliff. They would, those bodies would crash. They would cut them up and they would dry the meat and mix them with 50-50 fat, rendered fat, and they would call this pemmican. Okay, these were like iron rations. They used these in wars and armies and things like that, going back centuries. God, I don't even know how long, but and they last and last and last and last. You don't need preservatives and so forth. So, we found iron rations, the pemmican, from the colonial wars with England. The Revolutionary War with England. We found a cache of these things 50 years later, and it was like they'd been made yesterday. They were perfectly fine. Okay, so these things last a long time. That's generally what they would eat throughout the year, and there was very high fat. Okay, they didn't get what was called the diseases of the West. Okay, the diseases of the West, were gout, obesity, different sorts of issues, and we only saw this in the West, on these Western people and so forth. And then these non-Western people, they didn't get that. Well, that's strange. But now they're all getting the diseases of the West, and they're actually 4 times as likely to get the diseases of the West. Okay? Now we just call that aging. Now we just call that normal. And we say, oh, well, it was probably happening to everybody. We just didn't notice it. Then why are there hundreds of years of documentation looking at the contrast, saying these people get these diseases, these people do not get these diseases? These are the diseases of the West. There wouldn't be a name for it if people hadn't noticed these things. Okay, so it's just playing. It's just lazy. It's just lazy thinking. So you look at the Inuits, okay, in the far reaches of North America, or and anyone in the Arctic circles. There's no plants for them to eat, even if they wanted to eat them, which they don't. Early explorers, document these things all the time. They talk about the native people, and they talk about how they live, and they talk about what they eat. And I remember, I've read accounts of English explorers coming to North America, meeting the Inuits, and just marveling at how they only ate meat. And they're saying, well, okay, some of these people just live far north, and there's no plants to eat anyway, so they just have to eat meat all year. I get it, but there's some of these people that live further south, and for a few months out of the summer, they can, as they said, surely live off the bounty of the land. I always liked how they worded that. But they don't. They only eat meat. Even when they could grow crops, even when they could live off the plants, they don't. Okay, and and that's something that people say is like, oh well, actually they did. You can't get all your vitamins from meat or whatever. It's like, okay, well, what about the Inuits? Well, in the summers they would pick berries or some nonsense. Like maybe some did, but A, that's not going to last you the entire year, and B, as a group, no, they didn't. Okay, that was very clear. And C, people up north never had access to berries anyway. Okay, so nonsense. Again, lazy thinking. So then you look at like the Australian Aboriginals. Again, we have early explorer documentation and letters from missionaries and things like that. Again, talking about like these guys only eat meat, and it's crazy. There was a chapter in a book I was reading that was like a Belgium explorer in the 1600s, and he just absolutely loved these guys, and he just thought it was amazing how they lived and how healthy they were. And there's a chapter on diet. There's always a chapter on diet. Look it up, and every single time you will see it's talking about how they only eat meat, and how strong they are, how fit they are, how healthy they are, how they don't get the diseases of the West. Okay, and this guy in particular, he did strength tests and things like that to see how strong people were, and what they were eating. And so there were some native populations in Australia that, because of where they lived, they had access to meat all year round. And there were other ones that maybe they had to, shuffle in some plant-based things, in times of starvation or whatever. They knew which plants they could eat to tide them over and so forth, or used medicinally. And so people talk about, oh, well, actually the Aboriginals use all these different sorts of plants. How often did they use them? Was this a staple diet that they used every single day? No. Okay, so they knew what they could eat in order to survive if they couldn't get meat. But the second they got meat, that's all they ate. And the missionary documentation backs this up as well. They would say that. They would offer them bread, they would offer them wheat, and be like, get out of here, unless they couldn't get meat. Then they knew which plants to eat and they could eat them, right? But the second that they got meat, they tossed that stuff aside. Okay, so the strength tests and things like that, they had all the people that just ate meat, they were the strongest, and the people that just almost always ate meat were right there next to them, but just a little less. And then you have all the the European explorers and sailors and so forth, and basically they just sort of panned down all the different sorts of countries and things like that. So it's not it's not the best evidence in the world, but it's interesting, and it's something that these guys were thinking about even then. Like, hey, these guys are doing something different than us. They're just eating meat and they're really, really healthy. And in fact, they're stronger. The more meat you eat, the stronger you get. Okay, so it's something to think about anyway. I've spoken to native Australians here and discussed these sorts of things, and they kind of go like, yeah, this is what we used to eat. And this is, and that makes sense. And all of them say, and the most important thing is the fat. And I was like, I couldn't agree with you more. The fat is very, very important. And yet, we talk about lean. Okay. Lean is fine. I mean, lean meat is good, still good for you. The fat is vitally important. Okay. Fat and cholesterol, these things are part of your body, and if you don't have them in the requisite amounts, your body won't function properly, won't maintain itself properly, won't maintain your brain properly, your nerves properly, or your muscles properly. You need fat, you need cholesterol. There was a recent study that came out showing that actually higher rates of cholesterol, boosted muscle, muscle gain and support and so forth. So you need cholesterol, to build muscle as well as protein. Okay, it's not just protein. Okay, so in Australia, just like in the Native Americans in America, four times as likely to get these diseases, the Native Australians get these diseases of the West, much more readily, and they're a much more unhealthy population. They're doing the same things that everyone else is doing, but it's hitting them much harder. Okay, but when they go off of these things and go back to their natural diet, it goes away. And there have been studies showing that as well. Okay, and it was a move called Magic Pill as well. And they talked to these guys and just said, hey, this isn't what you eat. You guys don't normally eat this. Why don't you try eating what you used to eat? So, I've spoken to a lot of these people as well, as much as I can, but and the ones that I do talk to and are receptive to this, they were like, yeah, that makes sense. That's how I grew up as a kid. We were always skinny, we were always healthy, everyone was fine, and then you saw this sort of change, come over the people and so forth, and we started getting unwell and overweight and so forth, and having these problems. So they at least said, okay, we're going to go back to that, and hopefully that I'm sure will go well for them. But yeah, then you have like people like the Maasai in Africa. Okay, these guys are famous in the sense that they are still living as sort of Stone Age herdsmen. They have cattle, they have livestock, and they take care of them. And they've got lions. And so the lions come after their herd, and so they fight off the lions. So these guys fight lions with sticks and win, okay? You've got to be a pretty badass person to do that, okay? Taking out a lion with a gun is going to be a pretty good feat when that thing's barreling after you, okay? Try it with a stick sometime. See how you go, all right? So these guys are dangerous dudes. And the diet of the Maasai is pure meat and dairy, all right? Most of the people would eat, the kids and the women would just drink milk, the milk of their cattle, and that's usually about 8% milk fat from what I understand. So it's, again, high fat content. And then the warriors would drink the blood. So these guys, the guys that are fighting lions with sticks and winning, they're drinking blood, okay? And they'll eat meat as well. Sometimes they'll hunt and all these sorts of things as well. But they're not eating all the other things, okay? So again, as I talk about in a lot of my things, it's not enough to just eat more meat, but it's about not eating all the other things, because plants have toxins, and these toxins will harm you, okay? It's the plant's way of telling you to go away. Don't eat me. I'm going to hurt you, okay? So I listen. I'm happy. I'm happy to listen. I don't want to eat them, okay? Speaking about drinking blood, Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, they were famous for drinking blood. They were carnivores as well. They ate horse meat. They drank horse blood. They would ride out. They would just terrorize all of Asia and Europe, for 10 days, 5 days at a time, and they wouldn't eat the whole time. And then they would eat, feast for the whole night and eat 10 pounds of horse meat, and they would drink horse blood. So they're on these big rides. They would just drink the blood of their horse. So they had their horse was out there eating grass and running and making blood, and they would drink the blood, and that's how they went. So their horse was their refrigerator as well, and they worked very well. This empire was the largest contiguous empire that has ever existed in the history of humanity. Okay, these guys did well. These guys, Mongolians, little short Asian Mongolian guys, right? Wrong. These guys were on average 6'4". Okay, I'm 6'3". I would be below average for these guys. Okay, these guys were big. Okay, so again, stature, obviously genetics plays a role in everything, but the average height of a population shows the average health of a population. And when you see these big time carnivore populations, these very healthy populations eating naturally, you generally see their average height is about 6'4". Okay, and that's where the Mongols were. And you have prehistoric man where they were eating. There was an area where they were just eating just tons of mammoth. They had just an abundance of mammoths that they were eating until they ate all of them, and they as well were on average 6'4". Okay, so that seems to be genetically what humans are supposed to do, be on average about 6'4". The average height for humans now, for men right now, is like 5'8" or something like that. I mean, that's not even a man. You can't be 6 foot. I don't know. You've hurt yourself somewhere down the road. Okay, so I posted this recently on my Instagram, but there was a picture of these Kazakh warriors, these nomadic Kazakh warriors still living in this sort of carnivore state, standing next to normal people. They were literally giants. These guys were huge. But it's not abnormal. These guys didn't have gigantism or anything like that. They developed to their genetic potential. We are not. Basically none of us have developed our genetic potential. I didn't either. That really pisses me off. I would have been about 6 inches taller and much smarter. On average, again, our brains are 11% smaller than they were before the agricultural revolution. That bothers me. And what really bothers me is that we're doing this to future generations. We're harming kids. We're saying, oh no, we should go to a vegan diet. It's been shown time and time again that this causes increased miscarriages, increased rates of autism, increased rates of developmental delays, low bone densities, short stature, all these sorts of things. I mean, they're breastfeeding vegan mothers whose children are dying from the breast milk. Okay, how are we pretending that this is a good thing to do? Okay, people say, oh, you shouldn't smoke, you shouldn't drink while you're pregnant. And then they say, oh, but eat whatever you want. That doesn't make a difference. let's think about this, okay? You're putting chemicals in your body that's going to that fetus, okay? Those are either going to be beneficial or they're going to be adversarial. Like, it matters. It really matters. The reason that smoking is bad for your fetus is because it gets harmful chemicals to that fetus. The reason that alcohol is harmful to a fetus is because it brings harmful chemicals to that fetus. Well, the same goes for lettuce and spinach, okay? And if you're not eating enough meat and not getting enough fat, that child will have problems. Women who have lower LDL cholesterol during pregnancy have higher rates of kids with autism, okay? Those who eat more red meat in particular, preconception, have lower rates of kids with autism. Formula-fed babies, higher rates of kids with autism. Vegans and vegetarians have much higher rates of kids with autism. One of those reasons is causative, because they're not getting enough carnitine. You have carnitine from your food, but it's only really in meat. So you make some carnitine, but not everyone makes enough, or not everyone makes it at all, okay? And so if you're not getting that carnitine from your food, only meat, only animal products, okay, like dairy and things like that, you are not going to develop your brain properly. Carnitine is vital for proper brain development, okay? And so you can't actually form these neurons properly without enough carnitine. And a lot of other things too. Carnitine is a sticking point. So if you're vegetarian, the first thing you're going to drop is red meat, right? Because that's the worst. Well, in fact, it's the best, and it has the most carnitine. And so even if you're eating chicken and fish, maybe you're not getting enough carnitine. If your kid really doesn't make enough carnitine, or maybe doesn't make it at all, then vegans, they're not eating any plant material, okay? And they're not giving their kid any plant material. So that kid's getting zero carnitine, okay? So they're really deficient, and if they're even, don't make slightly enough, they're going to get this form of autism as well. And so, do what you want with your life. But, if someone is knowingly doing, if you know that your child won't develop properly, their brain won't develop properly, their body won't develop properly on a certain diet, and you choose to do that diet, I think that's abhorrent, honestly. I think that is absolute child abuse. And, think about it. Like, if you know that alcohol is bad for your fetus, and you just say, I don't care, I'm just going to drink and drink and drink, that's an awful thing to do. And I don't know why that would offend anyone, but if it does, I'm sorry that it does, but it's the truth. That is an awful thing to do, to knowingly damage your child or knowingly risk doing that, okay? Even a bit of alcohol is going to do something. People say, maybe like a glass of wine a day. I'm like, why would you do that? Even if you don't get fetal alcohol syndrome, it's not good, okay? It's not going to be a benefit to your child. It will be a detriment, okay? It may not be to the point that you have a syndrome that you can call it, but they're not going to be what they would have been. They're not going to develop to their potential, okay? And that's really important. 11% bigger brains, average 6'4". Look up the Cossack warriors. Those guys are huge. And you check it out on my page. The guys are massive. Maybe I'll try to put a picture here, but absolute beasts, okay? That's what I want, people to be. I want them to live out to their genetic potential, okay? So, and you go back. Let's look at the first instance in history, the historical text, right? Herodotus, the original father of history from ancient Greece, okay? This is, 2,700, 3,000 years ago, something like that. He chronicled a visitation between the Persian emissary, and who I think had just taken over Egypt at the time. And they came down to Ethiopia, to say hello, neighbor. Okay, the Ethiopian king asked the Persian emissary, like, hey, what does your emperor eat? How long do your people normally live? And the Persian ambassador said, it's like, well, explained how to, that they grew wheat. This is fairly early on in the agricultural revolution. This just hadn't spread everywhere by any stretch of the imagination. They're only in certain areas that sort of started in where Samaria and things like that, where Persia was and so forth, and then spread as well. Egypt had a lot of grew a lot of crops, had a lot of health issues as well. Actually, they had gynecomastia, their fat, like their statues even reflected this. Guys with pot bellies, and man boobs, so and bad teeth and all these things, atherosclerosis throughout all of them. It wasn't just the pharaohs and so forth. There's well, maybe they could eat more fatty meat. No. These were through everyone, because everyone was eating wheat. Everyone was getting these issues. Okay, so they explained wheat, they explained bread, and they said our people generally live about 70 years. This is thousands of years ago, right? Ethiopian king sort of laughed, and he said, well, no wonder you live such short lives if you eat the dirt, because we only eat boiled meat, we only drink the milk of our cattle, okay? We don't eat any of that nonsense, and our people usually live around 120 years, sometimes more, okay? Sounds pretty braggadocious, doesn't it? Unless you understand that genetically we are supposed to live 120 years. So he's not bragging at all. Okay, he is not exaggerating an inch. Okay, he said this is exactly, what we're actually seeing scientifically. Okay, genetically, chromosomally, we are supposed to live 120 years. Okay, the longest lived Native American, the guy lived 137 years. Okay, it wasn't like some feeble-minded, just drooling with Alzheimer's. Okay, they didn't get Alzheimer's. You ask your grandparents if they're still around. When they were kids, or someone older, when they were kids, were their grandparents in nursing homes? Did they get Alzheimer's? Did they get dementia? Did they, lose their faculties? Almost none of them did. Okay, so it's very new. It's a very heretofore little known condition, getting dementia and degrading your faculties to that extent. And then you look at different sorts of dietary issues, right? You have the ketogenic diet. There was a study showing that the ketogenic diet, a high fat ketogenic diet, was more efficacious in treating someone who already has Alzheimer's than every Alzheimer's medication that has been trialed. Okay, so every pharmaceutical that's ever been tried is not as good as just eating a high-fat ketogenic diet. Okay, well, imagine you go the full step and eat a full high-fat carnivore diet. Okay, you're going to be even better, because you're not going to have any of these inflammatory factors in plants or these harmful toxins that are going to screw with your brain. Okay, they're calling dementia type 3 diabetes now. We're talking about this as a metabolic syndrome now, because there are similarities between type 2 and type 3 diabetes. Well, we know that fructose is a major causative factor in type 2 diabetes. Now they're looking like, okay, well maybe this is indicated in Alzheimer's as well. There was a recent research I saw that came out, again, talking about why a ketogenic diet is helpful with people with Alzheimer's and so forth. We look at the plaques in the brain of Alzheimer's, and we focus on this. How do these form? Why do these form? And that actually doesn't really matter to an extent. What really matters, what really makes a difference, is your brain and its energy source. So if you're eating carbohydrates, you have abundance of blood sugar, and you have abundance of insulin, because this is trying to get this out. As I talk about in other videos, high blood sugar is toxic. Okay, the glucose molecules physically fuse to other molecules and damage them, destroy them. Okay, this is called glycation. Okay, this is what kills diabetics. Okay, just that high blood sugar does direct damage to your body. Okay, well, it's doing that to your brain. Okay, first of all. Second of all, insulin's up all the time, and so it's just shoving energy in. So when you're in a so-called fed state, which as people who know me know that I don't agree with the terminology in biochemistry, the fed state and the fasting state. I think that the fasting state is our primary metabolic state. That's where all of our heavy machinery comes to bear, and that's the metabolic state of animals in the wild when you see them, including humans. Okay, so when you're in a fed state, a carbohydrate, insulin-driven state, you're forcing energy in, so your brain runs on glucose and on ketones. Okay, and then when you go to a fasting state, your normal state, it predominantly runs on ketones, but it always runs on ketones. It doesn't always run on glucose. Okay, it always runs on ketones. And so we say that, your brain really wants glucose. No, when your insulin's up, you are getting rid of this glucose to anyone around, and your brain will suck it up. Your brain's high energy user. Okay, so eventually you're going to get insulin resistance. Okay, because this stuff causes harm over time, all right? And when you develop insulin resistance, but you're still only eating carbohydrates, now just like the rest of your body, energy can't get in properly, okay? So now you're not feeding your brain energy, and it starts to decay. It starts to break down. It can't support itself. It can't maintain itself, and you'll start to slowly develop dementia, okay? Then you put people on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, okay? And now they switch back to ketones. They don't need the glucose, okay? So now you're getting energy into your brain wakes up again. It can start healing again. It can start restructuring itself again, okay? You need sleep, you need fuel, okay? Your brain's made out of fat, very long chain fatty acids, 20 and 22 chain fatty acids. Those don't exist in plants. You only get them from meat. And if you're eating a heart-healthy, low-fat diet, you're not going to get the requisite materials to your brain to build and maintain it, okay? If you don't get enough sleep, have a similar problem, because if people that average less than 6 hours of sleep a night are 6 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's. Okay, this is because your brain is breaking down as we are awake. Okay, when the neurons are firing, they break down. Okay, it actually damages them for a lot of different reasons, which I talk about in other talks as well. So you need to go to sleep in order to repair all these sorts of things and to recycle your neurotransmitters, which can actually cause damage to your body when they're in their broken down form. Okay, so sleep gets workers to the job site, starts cleaning things up, but they're not going to rebuild anything without concrete. Okay, so that's where the long chain fatty acids come in. They're also, if they're tired and not doing well, they're not going to be able to get as much done either. So if you're on a carbohydrate driven state and you have insulin resistance, you're not going to get as much work done, okay? And you're going to break down. And so if you're in a ketogenic diet, carnivore diet, right? You're just in that metabolic state that you're supposed to be in. Your brain will work as it's supposed to work. And so you'll get the energy in that your brain needs, okay? So this a quick rundown with a couple tangents on some of the evidence and arguments for why we should be doing carnivore and why that's beneficial. Obviously, it's beneficial for everyone, but it's most important at the extremes of age. Okay, so people that are aging and getting older, their bodies are going to be breaking down, and you're going to be aging abnormally. Okay, you're going to have early, premature aging and so forth, and you're going to die prematurely, unfortunately. Okay, so people should be regularly getting to 120. Okay, that should just be normal. All right, and if you're not doing that, something's wrong, and you need to identify what it is. Okay, then in the early populations, in the young, that is hands down the most important. Okay, because you never get 2 chances to develop. Once your body is developed and it's set, and you have all your permanent tissues, that's it. It's a done deal. You can maintain and optimize what you have to work as well as possible, but you're never going to grow taller. Your brain's never going to grow bigger. Okay, so that is very important, very, very important. Okay, so in the womb is where it starts, obviously, and then early breastfeeding and early diet as well. This is vitally important. I talk about this in other things, but I have friends that have carnivore kids, and they had flawless pregnancies. They didn't really have any morning sickness or issues, and their kids came out very, very healthy. They actually had to keep bumping up their expected due dates because the kid was just developing faster, not bigger, not getting too big that it wouldn't go through, actually normal birth weight, because your body is supposed to be a certain size to get this baby out of us. Okay, and in the last century we've been getting higher and higher birth weights and bigger heads and things like that, making this more difficult. And we're just evolving bigger brains. Like, not in 100 years, man. I mean, give me a break. Something else is happening. Okay, so we're feeding people carbohydrates, and this is causing precocious growth, and they're just getting too big. You're getting gestational diabetes and very high birth weights. That's not normal, and you don't get that with carnivore. Okay, and so with these carnivore pregnancies, they go much better. Have much better pregnancies, much better deliveries, much better birth weights, much healthier kids. And then they're developing, and then their brains grow like crazy. The shape of their skull is different. It's remarkable how different it is. I see pictures of these kids with other kids they're not even like doing a vegan diet, but just normal kids. And if you looked at that normal kid, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's a normal kid. That's a cute little kid. And you see him next to this other person, the head is like twice as big. I'm like, okay, what's happening here? Does that other kid have a problem? Well, no, not in particular. This other kid is just doing it, is just developing to his genetic potential, where unfortunately this other kid isn't, just because the parents don't know. They don't know how important that is, okay? It's vitally important, okay? Even the incorporation of some plants completely changes things. My friend was eating all meat and just oats. That's it, okay? No other plants, no sugar, nothing else. Kid was healthy and fine. She dropped the oats at about 3 months, okay? Just eating meat, was breastfeeding at the time. That kid, her head circumference went from 50th percentile up to 99th percentile in 1 month. They thought that she had hydrocephalus. They thought that she actually had a disease, okay? But she didn't. It was just her brain all of a sudden had the tethers, the reins taken off of her, and she could just go. And so her brain started developing the way it's supposed to develop, the way all of our brains were supposed to develop, the way all of our brains have developed for millions of years. But unfortunately, we've been held back, okay? So something to think about, especially for the kids and the children out there. You still have time, even if you're a teenager and even if you're an adult, there's no bad time to stop eating poison, okay? You will absolutely benefit beyond anything you can imagine. Like it's just insane how much better you feel and the benefits that your body gets and the health thereof, okay? All right, guys, hope that wasn't too much. Hopefully that was informative, and let me know what you think. Thanks a lot.